I was pouring coffee at the dinner table when my daughter-in-law, Paula, decided to drop the kind of news that can flip a whole life upside down. She lifted her wine glass like she was about to give a toast at some fancy wedding. That smile of hers, sweet enough to give you cavities, was stretched across her face. "Okay, everyone," she said, clinking her glass with a fork. "I've got a surprise for my mother-in-law." The whole table went quiet. My son, Armando, sat beside her, grinning like a proud little kid who just brought home a gold star from school. Paula continued, her voice syrupy smooth. "Armando and I sold our apartment, and starting tomorrow, we're moving into Mom's house." The whole table burst into cheers. Someone even laughed and said, "Wow, what a beautiful family moment." Beautiful. Yeah, sure. I calmly folded my napkin and dabbed the corners of my mouth like I'd just heard the weather forecast instead of someone announcing they planned to invade my home. Then I looked directly at Paula. "Well, that's perfect," I said calmly. They all smiled like they expected a thank you speech. "But there's just one tiny issue," I added. The smiles froze. "Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, I said, taking a slow sip of coffee, "I'm handing the keys of this house to the new owners." You could have heard a pin drop. Actually, scratch that, you could have heard someone blink. Paula's wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. Armando went pale. The other guests suddenly became extremely fascinated with their plates. No one spoke, no one moved, and I just sat there quietly sipping my coffee while the shock spread across the room like spilled ink. After 65 years on this earth, I'd learned something important. Sometimes silence hits harder than shouting. But to understand why I said those words, why I watched my own family fall apart at that dinner table, you need to know who I was before that moment. My name is Amelia Gonzalez. I'm 65 years old, and for most of my life, I was invisible. Not literally invisible, obviously. People saw me walking down the street. Neighbors waved. Cashiers said hello. But nobody really looked at me. Nobody asked what I wanted, what I dreamed about, what I needed. I was just Mom, the reliable one, the one who'd always be there. Like an old couch nobody bothers to replace, or a shadow that follows you around but never gets its own spotlight. 12 years ago, my husband, Roberto, died suddenly. Heart attack. Just like that. One random Tuesday afternoon while watering the hydrangeas in the backyard, the flowers he loved more than anything. By the time I found him lying there among them, it was already over. And the first thought that hit me after the shock faded was terrifying. Now I'm completely alone. My son Armando had already been married for 3 years back then. He had his career, his wife, his plans, his future. Meanwhile, I was left in a big, quiet house filled with memories that echoed through empty hallways. The first few months after Roberto died were brutal. I'd wake up in the morning expecting to hear him in the kitchen making coffee. Sometimes I'd even set out 2 mugs. Then I'd remember, just one. Always just one. Armando visited on Sundays sometimes, if he didn't have other plans. He'd bring donuts from the bakery and sit with me for an hour. 2 hours if I got lucky. We'd talk about small things, the weather, his job, stuff on the news, but never the real stuff, never the things that hurt. And somewhere during that lonely stretch of time, Paula started showing up more often. At first, I thought she was just being kind, but later I realized something important. Paula never asked a question without a reason. Every conversation had a direction. Every smile had a purpose. And slowly, very slowly, she started planting an idea in my mind. an idea about my house, an idea about my future, an idea that would eventually explode at that dinner table. But the truth is, by the time I realized what Paula was really planning, it was already way too late, and what she did next would make that dinner announcement look like the warm-up round. At first, Paula's visits felt nice. I mean, after Roberto died, the house was so quiet it practically echoed. The ticking clock in the hallway sounded like a drum some nights. So when Paula started dropping by more often, I figured maybe she was just trying to be thoughtful. She'd show up on Wednesday afternoons like clockwork, always carrying something. Flowers, fresh bread, a little dessert from that fancy bakery downtown, and always that smile. Man, that smile. Back then, I thought it meant kindness. Now I know it meant strategy. She'd sit down in Roberto's old armchair, the one nobody had touched since he passed, and cross her legs like she owned the place. "So, how are you doing today, Mom?" she'd ask sweetly. I'd shrug. Same old, same old. Then the conversation would drift around the house. Not about life, not about memories, about the house. "Oh, wow," she'd say, looking around slowly like a real estate agent pretending to be casual. "This place is huge for just one person." I'd laugh it off. "Well, it's always been home." She'd nod slowly, but her eyes would keep scanning the room, counting, measuring, calculating. "You're not scared living here alone?" she'd ask. "Why would I be?" "Well," she'd say softly, lowering her voice like she was sharing gossip, "I read in the news that there were break-ins around this area recently." Boom. Seed planted. Next visit, it was something else. Maintaining a house this big must be exhausting. Another seed. Then the week after that, my aunt had a house like this, too big for her. Eventually, she had to sell it because it became too much work. Another seed. At first, I brushed it off because to me, this wasn't just some property. This house was my life. Roberto and I bought it 40 years ago when Armando was just a little kid running around in Spider-Man pajamas. We painted the walls ourselves. Well, mostly me. Roberto would hold the ladder and pretend he was helping. I still remember the first Christmas in this house. We didn't even have proper furniture yet, just folding chairs and a cheap plastic table, but we were laughing like we had won the lottery. Armando learned to ride a bike in the driveway. He scraped his knees on that exact sidewalk outside. We buried our old dog Bruno in the backyard under the oak tree. Every corner of that house held a piece of our story. But to Paula, it was just square footage. And slowly, Armando started repeating her words. At first, it was subtle. "Mom, are you doing okay here alone?" Then it turned into suggestions. "You know, a smaller place might be easier." Then it turned into full-on proposals. One Sunday afternoon, he leaned back on the couch and said it like it was the most logical thing in the world. "Mom, Paula and I were thinking maybe you should sell the house." Just like that. Sell it. Like we were talking about an old couch on Craigslist. I stared at him. "You want me to sell the house your father built?" "No, no, Mom," he said quickly. "Not like that. Just think about it." Paula chimed in instantly. "There are beautiful condos downtown," she said. "Small, modern, safe, elevators, security, everything." She pulled out her phone like she had the listings ready, which, spoiler alert, she did. "Look at this one," she said, showing me pictures. 2 bedrooms, balcony, gym in the building, perfect for someone your age. Someone your age. That phrase hit differently, like suddenly I had been moved into the fragile old lady category. And then came the sales pitch. You wouldn't have to worry about yard work anymore. You'd be closer to us. You'd have more money to enjoy life. Travel, relax, see the world. Man, they painted a pretty picture. And for a moment, just a tiny moment, I started wondering if they were right. Because living alone in a big house can feel heavy sometimes. The quiet gets loud, the memories creep in at night. But something about the way Paula kept smiling, something about how fast the conversation kept coming back to the same topic, it didn't feel like concern. It felt like pressure, like she was gently steering the ship towards a destination I hadn't agreed to. And then one Sunday, over a fancy dinner Paula cooked, she finally said the real number out loud. "Your house is probably worth around $400,000, she said casually while cutting her lamb. I nearly choked on my wine. $400,000? She continued smoothly. You could sell it, buy a smaller condo for maybe $150K, and still have plenty left. I leaned back slowly. Plenty left? For what? She smiled again. That smile. "Well," she said softly, "for helping Armando and I buy our own place." And just like that, the whole plan finally stepped out of the shadows. But what Paula didn't realize yet was that the quiet old woman sitting across from her had just started paying very close attention. And once I started connecting the dots, the game at that dinner table was about to change. Because the next thing Paula did proved this wasn't just a suggestion, it was a full-blown setup. After that dinner conversation, something inside me shifted. Not dramatically, not like in the movies where someone suddenly slams their hand on the table and shouts, "I know what you're doing." No, it was quieter than that. More like my eyes finally focusing after being blurry for a long time. Because once Paula said that number, $400,000, her behavior changed. Not a lot, but just enough for me to notice. Suddenly, every visit revolved around houses. Not my house, their future house. "Oh, look at this one," she'd say while sitting at my kitchen table scrolling through her phone. 4 bedrooms, modern kitchen, big yard. She'd turn the screen toward me like we were planning a family vacation together. But the truth was, she wasn't showing me possibilities. She was showing me expectations. Armando joined in too. One Sunday, he leaned over my laptop and said casually, "Mom, houses are getting expensive fast. If we don't buy soon, we might miss our chance." I raised an eyebrow. "You've only been talking about buying a house for 2 weeks." He chuckled nervously. "Well, yeah, but still." Paula jumped in quickly. "Real estate moves fast," she said. "Of course it does. Funny how it suddenly became urgent the moment my house entered the conversation." Then one afternoon, Paula brought over something new. Paperwork. Actual paperwork. She laid it neatly on the table like she was presenting a business proposal. "I found a great real estate agent," she said brightly. I stared at the stack of papers. "You already called an agent?" "Well, I just asked some questions," she said quickly. I flipped through the pages. Market analysis, property evaluation, neighborhood pricing trends. This wasn't a casual conversation anymore. This was a project. I looked up at her slowly. "You've been busy." She laughed. "Oh, come on, Mom. I'm just trying to help." Help. That word again. But here's the thing about being 65 years old. You've lived long enough to recognize patterns. And something about this pattern felt off. Because every time the topic came up, the focus wasn't my comfort. It wasn't my happiness. It wasn't even my future. It was always about what they could do with the money. "We could finally have a baby," Paula said one day. That one hit hard, because now she wasn't just talking about houses. She was talking about family dreams. "You'd be a grandmother," she said softly. Armando nodded beside her. "We've been waiting for the right moment." Waiting. For what? My house? The implication hung in the air like smoke. And suddenly, I understood something important. This wasn't about helping me. This was about unlocking an investment. My house wasn't a home to them anymore. It was a financial opportunity. But the moment that really opened my eyes happened about a week later. I had gone to the grocery store. Nothing special, just picking up milk, bread, and coffee, when I ran into my neighbor, Linda. Linda had lived across the street for 30 years. She knew everything that happened in our neighborhood. And as we stood there talking in the produce aisle, she casually mentioned something. "Oh, I met your daughter-in-law yesterday." I blinked. "You did?" "Yeah, she was outside your house talking to some real estate guy." My stomach tightened. "A real estate guy?" "Yeah, tall man, gray suit, looked like an agent." Linda smiled. "She was showing him around your property." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Showing him around my house without telling me. I forced a small laugh. "Oh, maybe she was just asking questions." Linda shrugged. "Maybe, but it looked like they were measuring the yard." Measuring the yard. Right then and there, standing next to a pile of oranges in the grocery store. Everything clicked. The flowers, the friendly visits, the condo suggestions, the paperwork, the baby talk, the urgency. It wasn't random. It wasn't concern. It was strategy. They had already decided the house was going to be sold. They were just waiting for me to catch up to the plan. I drove home slowly that day, and when I pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, looking at the house Roberto and I built together, looking at the windows where Christmas lights once glowed, looking at the porch where Armando used to wait for the school bus. And a strange thought crossed my mind. For the first time since Roberto died, I felt something other than sadness. I felt alert, because if Paula thought she was the only one playing a long game, she was about to learn something about the quiet old woman she underestimated. And what I did the very next morning would completely flip her entire plan upside down. But the call I made that day started a chain reaction none of them were ready for. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sun was barely peeking through the kitchen window when I made myself a cup of coffee. The house was quiet, just like always. But this time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt clear, like the fog had finally lifted. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of papers Paula had left behind the week before. Market reports, price estimates, property listings. She had done a lot of homework, but she made one mistake. She thought I wasn't paying attention. I took another sip of coffee and picked up my phone. There was a number on the top page of the paperwork. The real estate agent she had just asked a few questions. I dialed it. The phone rang twice. "Good morning, this is Richard Collins with Horizon Realty." His voice sounded confident, polished, like a man who had sold a lot of houses. "Hello, Richard," I said calmly. "My name is Amelia Gonzalez." There was a short pause. "Oh, Mrs. Gonzalez," he said quickly. "Yes, your daughter-in-law Paula mentioned you might call." Of course she did. I leaned back in my chair. "She told you about my house?" "Yes, ma'am. Beautiful property, great neighborhood. Honestly, homes in your area are selling very fast right now." I almost smiled. Fast. That word again. "I see," I said quietly. He continued, clearly excited. "With the current market conditions, I believe your home could sell for somewhere between $380,000 and $420,000. Almost exactly what Paula said. Interesting. "So you've already evaluated the property?" I asked. "Well, I stopped by briefly yesterday," he said. "Your daughter-in-law showed me around the outside." There it was, confirmation. My fingers tapped lightly on the table. "Mr. Collins," I said calmly, "let me ask you a question." "Of course." "If I did decide to sell the house, how quickly could it happen?" He didn't hesitate. "Oh, in this market? Very quickly. 2 weeks, maybe 3 if we price it right." 2 weeks. I looked around the kitchen. The same kitchen where Roberto used to burn pancakes every Sunday morning. The same table where Armando did his homework as a kid. 40 years of memories sitting quietly around me. Then I asked the question Paula probably thought I'd never ask. What if I wanted to sell it immediately? There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Well, we could list it today," he said carefully, "but normally people take time to prepare the house. I don't need time." Another pause. "Mrs. Gonzalez, are you serious?" I took a slow breath. Yes, because at that moment, something became very clear in my mind. Paula had already turned my home into a financial plan, so why not take control of the plan myself? "All right," he said slowly. "If you're ready, I can come by this afternoon and discuss everything." "Come at 2 o'clock." "Perfect. I'll bring the paperwork." We hung up. I sat there quietly for a moment, letting the decision settle. Was it emotional? Maybe, but it also felt strangely powerful. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to other people's plans. I was making my own. Later that afternoon, Richard Collins arrived right on time. Gray suit, leather briefcase, professional smile, just like Linda described. We walked through the house together. He took notes, measured rooms, asked questions. Every now and then he'd say things like, "This living room is huge. Buyers love original hardwood floors. This backyard alone adds serious value." But while he was seeing square footage, I was seeing memories. Roberto laughing on the porch, Armando chasing our dog Bruno across the lawn, Christmas lights hanging from the gutters. By the end of the tour, we sat back down at the kitchen table. Richard opened his folder. "Mrs. Gonzalez," he said, "if we list the house tomorrow at $399,000, I'm confident we'll get offers quickly." I nodded slowly. "And what happens after that?" "Well, once an offer is accepted, closing usually takes about 30 days. 30 days. Interesting. I folded my hands. "Let's do it." Richard blinked. "You're sure?" "Yes." He pushed the paperwork toward me. "Then all I need is your signature right here." I looked down at the page. One signature. That's all it took. 40 years in a house, and one signature could change everything. I picked up the pen and signed, just like that. Richard smiled. "Congratulations, Mrs. Gonzalez. Your house is officially on the market." I leaned back in my chair. But the funny part, Paula and Armando still had no idea, because the real surprise wasn't the sale itself. The real surprise was the dinner I had already started planning for next week. A dinner where Paula planned to make a big announcement, and honestly, I couldn't wait to hear it. Because what happened at that dinner table would leave everyone in the room completely speechless. Once the house went on the market, something inside me felt strangely calm. Not sad, not scared, just calm. For years after Roberto died, every day felt like I was drifting, like life was happening around me instead of with me. But now, for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was actually steering the ship. And the funny part? Nobody else had a clue. Not Paula, not Armando, not even the neighbors. Richard Collins kept his word. The listing went live the very next morning. Professional photos, online ads, the whole thing. Your house is going to attract a lot of attention, he told me on the phone. These older homes with big yards are gold right now. He wasn't wrong. Within 48 hours, the phone started ringing. Viewings, appointments, people wanting to walk through the property, couples, families, investors, strangers walking through the same rooms where my life had unfolded. The first showing felt weird. I stood outside on the sidewalk while a young couple walked through my home with their real estate agent. The woman pointed at the kitchen window and said something excitedly to her husband. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the body language. They liked it. When they left, the husband smiled at me politely. "Beautiful house," he said. I smiled back. "Thank you." That happened again and again and again. By the end of the fourth day, Richard called me, sounding excited. "We already have 3 serious offers," he said. 3! I almost laughed. 40 years of living there, and the house found new buyers in less than a week. "Send them to me," I said calmly. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table reviewing the offers. One was for $385,000, another for $395,000. The third? $410,000, over asking price. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. $410,000. Paula guessed pretty close, but she didn't guess that part, the part where someone wanted it even more than she expected. I called Richard back. "Let's accept the $410,000 offer." He almost shouted through the phone. "Great choice! I'll start the paperwork immediately." And just like that, the house was under contract. But the real game, that was happening somewhere else entirely. Because while all of this was happening quietly behind the scenes, Paula was busy preparing her big moment. About 5 days later, she called me. Her voice was cheerful, almost too cheerful. "Mom, we're having dinner at your place Saturday night." I raised an eyebrow. "Are we?" "Yeah," she laughed. "We want to celebrate something." Celebrate. Interesting choice of words. "What are we celebrating?" I asked. "Oh, you'll see," she said playfully. "It's a surprise." "A surprise?" I nearly chuckled. "All right," I said calmly. "Saturday works." "Great. Invite a few family members, too. It'll be fun." Fun. Sure. After we hung up, I sat quietly in the living room thinking about the coming weekend. The truth was, I already knew exactly what she planned to announce. The move. Her plan to move into my house. Probably framed like some emotional family bonding moment. Armando would smile proudly, relatives would clap, and they'd all assume I'd happily agree. Except there was one tiny problem, a problem none of them knew about. Because by the time Paula stood up to make that speech, my house would already belong to someone else. Technically not finalized yet, but legally, the deal was already moving forward. And I had something else planned too. Something small, something subtle, something that would make Paula's grand announcement land like a dropped bowling ball. The days leading up to the dinner passed quietly. Paula texted me constantly. "What time should we come? Do you need help cooking? Should we bring wine?" I answered politely, friendly, calm, like nothing unusual was happening. But inside, I was watching the clock tick towards Saturday night. And the closer that dinner got, the more curious I became. Not about what Paula was going to say. I already knew that part. What I was curious about was the look on her face when she realized she had been planning a move into a house that was no longer mine. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't yelling, it's letting someone confidently walk straight into the truth. And that dinner table was about to become the stage for the biggest shock Paula ever experienced. But what happened before the dinner even started was something I never expected, because the day before the dinner, Armando showed up at my door with a question that nearly changed everything, and the way he asked it made my stomach drop, because for the first time, it sounded like he already knew something was wrong. Friday afternoon was quiet. Too quiet. I had just finished watering the flowers in the backyard, the same hydrangeas Roberto used to take care of, when I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Armando. He rarely visited on Fridays. Sundays were his usual day. So the moment I saw his truck through the window, I felt a little knot tighten in my stomach. I dried my hands on a towel and walked to the front door. Before I even opened it, he knocked. 3 quick knocks, just like when he was a kid. I opened the door. "Hey, Mom." His voice sounded normal, but his eyes looked nervous. "Hi, Armando," I said. "Come in." He stepped inside slowly, looking around the living room like he hadn't seen it in years, which honestly might have been true. "Everything okay?" I asked. Yeah, he said quickly. But he didn't sit down. Instead, he shoved his hands into his pockets and stood there like he was rehearsing something in his head. Then he finally said it. "Mom, are you planning to sell the house?" For a split second, my heart skipped, not because I was guilty, but because the question came earlier than I expected. I tilted my head slightly. "Why would you ask that?" He shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "I heard something." That sentence hung in the air. Heard something. From who? Richard? A neighbor? Paula? I kept my voice calm. "What exactly did you hear?" Armando shifted his weight. "Well, Paula said someone came by the house earlier this week." Ah, so Paula had noticed the real estate agent. Of course she did. "She thought maybe you were thinking about selling," he continued. I walked slowly to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. "Armando," I said casually, "do you think I'm not allowed to think about selling my own house?" "That's not what I meant," he said quickly. I leaned against the counter. "Then what did you mean?" He hesitated, and for the first time I saw something in his face that hadn't been there during those conversations with Paula. Uncertainty. "Mom, if you sell the house," he said carefully, "where would you go?" "Good question." "One of those condos Paula likes so much, maybe," I replied. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, about that." There it was again, that nervous energy. "What about it?" I asked. He sighed. "I think Paula and I were actually hoping, well, we thought maybe—" He stopped mid-sentence, like the words suddenly felt heavier than he expected. I watched him quietly. Finally, he blurted it out. "We thought maybe we could move in here for a while." There it was, the real plan. Not helping Mom, not keeping Mom safe. They wanted the house. I took a slow sip of water. "For a while?" I asked. "Yeah," he said quickly, "just until we save up for our own place." I nodded slowly. "And how long do you think that would take?" He shrugged. "A year, maybe 2?" 2 years in my house. Interesting. "And where would I live?" I asked. Armando blinked. "Well, the condo idea is still good." "Of course it is." I almost laughed. Instead, I kept my voice calm. "You and Paula seem to have thought about this a lot." He looked relieved. "Yeah, we really have." He took a step closer. "Mom, it would be perfect. The house is big enough for everyone." "Everyone, except the person who actually owns it. You wouldn't be lonely anymore," he added. I looked at him carefully. My little boy. The kid who used to cry when his ice cream fell on the sidewalk. The teenager who begged me for car keys. The young man who once promised he'd always take care of me. Now standing in my kitchen, pitching a living arrangement that slowly pushed me out of my own home. Life is funny like that. "Armando," I said softly. "Yeah? Tell me something honestly. Okay, was this your idea or Paula's?" He froze, just for a second, but that second told me everything. "I mean, we talked about it together." "Together, sure." I nodded. "Well, that's interesting timing." "Timing?" "Yes." He frowned. "What do you mean?" I smiled slightly. "Oh, nothing important." He looked confused, but before he could ask more questions, I changed the subject. "So, are you still coming to dinner tomorrow?" "Yeah," he said slowly. "Paula's really excited about it." "I bet she is, because she thinks tomorrow night is the moment her plan becomes official." "Good," I said. "I'll make your favorite roast." Armando finally relaxed a little. "Thanks, Mom." He gave me a quick hug and headed toward the door. But right before leaving, he turned back. "Mom, yes? If you were thinking about selling the house, you'd tell me first, right?" I smiled gently. "Of course." It wasn't a lie, technically, because tomorrow night at dinner, everyone would find out at the exact same moment. And something told me Paula was about to learn a very important lesson, a lesson about making plans in someone else's house. Because when she stood up to make her big announcement, the truth waiting on the other side of that moment was going to hit a lot harder than she expected. But what Paula said during that dinner speech made the entire room gasp before I even had the chance to respond. Saturday evening arrived faster than I expected. By 5 o'clock, the house smelled like roasted garlic, butter, and the beef roast slowly cooking in the oven. The same recipe Roberto used to request every birthday. I set the table carefully. White plates, wine glasses, cloth napkins. Nothing fancy, just the way our family dinners had always been. But tonight wasn't a normal family dinner. Tonight felt more like a stage play, and everyone coming through that door had a role to play, even if they didn't realize it yet. Around 6:30, the first guests arrived. My sister Elena came in carrying a bottle of wine. "Smells amazing in here," she said, hugging me. "Thank you," I smiled. A few minutes later, my cousin Miguel showed up with his wife. Laughter filled the living room as coats were tossed on chairs and people started chatting. Then, right at 7 o'clock, Armando and Paula walked in. Paula was dressed like she was attending a celebration. Nice dress, perfect makeup, big smile. Armando followed behind her holding a dessert box from a fancy bakery. "Mom," Paula said cheerfully, hugging me like we were best friends. "Good to see you," I replied calmly. Her perfume was strong, sweet, almost too sweet. "I brought cheesecake," she announced proudly, lifting the box. "Oh, good," my sister Elena said. "I love cheesecake." Paula glanced around the house while people talked and laughed. Her eyes moved slowly across the walls, the furniture, the staircase, like she was already imagining where her own things would go. I noticed. Of course I noticed. Dinner started around 7:30. Everyone sat around the big wooden table Roberto and I bought decades ago. The same table where Armando once spilled juice on his math homework. The same table where we celebrated birthdays, holidays, and family news. Tonight felt different, though. There was a strange excitement in the air, but only one person knew exactly what kind. Paula. She kept glancing at Armando across the table like they were sharing a secret. Every few minutes, she'd take a sip of wine and smile, almost like she was waiting for the perfect moment. Finally, halfway through dinner, she tapped her fork against her glass. Clink, clink, clink. The room slowly quieted. Here it comes, I thought. Paula stood up. Her smile widened as she looked around the table. Okay, everyone, she said brightly. I wanted to gather the family tonight because Armando and I have some exciting news. People leaned forward. My cousin Miguel raised his eyebrows. Ooh, my sister Elena said playfully. This sounds serious. Paula laughed. Well, kind of. She reached for Armando's hand. He squeezed it nervously. We've been thinking a lot about our future. Future. There's that word again. And we realized something important. She paused for dramatic effect. This family means everything to us. People nodded politely. Then Paula looked directly at me. With Mom living here alone in such a big house and Armando and I wanting to start a family soon, start a family. There it was again, that emotional hook. We realized the perfect solution was right in front of us. I could feel every pair of eyes slowly turning toward me. Paula took a deep breath. Starting tomorrow, Armando and I are moving into Mom's house. Boom! The words landed like fireworks in the room. For a second, there was silence. Then suddenly, oh, wow, that's wonderful. What a great idea. People started clapping. Clapping! My sister Elena smiled at me. That'll be nice for you, Amelia, she said. Nice. Armando looked relieved. Paula looked victorious, like someone who just finished a long campaign and finally claimed the prize. She lifted her wine glass happily. To family, she said. Everyone raised their glasses, except me. I calmly folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. Then I took a slow sip of coffee, and finally I spoke. Well, I said gently. Paula's smile grew even bigger. Isn't it a wonderful surprise? She asked. Yes, I replied. It really is. She relaxed. Everyone relaxed. But then I added the one sentence that turned the entire room to ice. Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, I said calmly, I'm handing the keys of this house to the new owners. Silence. Absolute silence. Paula blinked. Armando stopped breathing. The wine glass slipped from Paula's hand and shattered on the floor. Because the announcement she thought would secure her future had just collided head first with a reality she never saw coming. But the most shocking part wasn't the broken glass. It was the look on Paula's face when she realized something terrifying. The plan she had spent months building had just collapsed in front of the entire family. And the next thing she said proved she still didn't understand what had just happened, because Paula wasn't ready to accept the truth, and what she did next turned that dinner into a full-blown confrontation. As the words hung in the air, a thick silence enveloped the room. The shattered wine glass on the floor was the only sound. Paula froze, her face drained of color. Armando looked like he'd just seen a ghost. The entire family was stunned into silence, unable to process the shock that had just been delivered. I watched them carefully, feeling a strange satisfaction. This wasn't just about a house or money. It was about control. It was about taking back the power I had unknowingly surrendered to Paula and Armando. Paula opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. She blinked several times, clearly trying to process what I had just said. Armando's face twisted in disbelief, but he said nothing, as if his voice had been stolen by the weight of the moment. I slowly set my coffee cup down, my eyes never leaving Paula's face. I'm sorry, but the sale is final. The house is already sold, and it's no longer ours to keep. Paula's lips trembled as she finally spoke. You You sold the house behind our backs?" she whispered, her voice a mix of anger and disbelief. I nodded calmly, feeling the sting of her words, but refusing to back down. Yes, you weren't the only one planning for the future. I had plans too. And this is the best decision for me. The room was so still that I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. Every single person was waiting for someone to say something, but all I could see was the look of realization slowly dawning on Paula's face. The quiet woman she had underestimated had just flipped the script on her. "Why?" Paula asked, her voice shaky. "Why would you do this to me?" I stood up, looking at my family gathered around the table. "Because I'm done being the pawn in your game. You thought you could push me around, take my house and claim it as your own, but I won't be your stepping stone anymore." I glanced at Armando, who was still holding his breath, his eyes wide. He hadn't said a word, but his face showed everything: shock, regret, and perhaps a hint of fear. He knew what was coming next. "Mom, we just wanted what was best for you," he said quietly, finally finding his voice. "We fought—" "Thought what?" interrupted I, my voice steady. "That I needed saving? I don't need anyone to rescue me. I'm capable of making my own decisions, and this is mine." The dinner that was supposed to be a celebration of family dreams had turned into a battlefield. Paula stood there, stunned, while Armando was the first to break the silence. "Well, we never meant for things to go this far." But it was too late. The damage was done. I looked around at the family who had been silently observing the drama unfolding. They were still processing the surprise, their expressions ranging from shock to confusion. "Tonight," I said, "I've made my decision, and now so have you."